Hello, everybody. This is week 6 of the office hours. Let me just make sure that things seem okay. Yep. Okay, so we have a few viewers. Okay, so first thing is that we extended the project. We tend to do this with project one, sort of depending on the kinds of conversations that we see on Piazza. It seems, I mean, it's always like that, and there tends to be sort of a last minute dash of trying to resolve a few last minute bugs, and we found that students can really benefit. So this is why we're doing that. So hopefully you will take advantage of the extra 24 hours and be able to kind of clean up a few other places, get some extra points. We did get some surprising questions just yesterday. When is the project due, and when is can I get access to GitHub? So hopefully that those were the only two isolated cases. Again, the projects are the grade is based on a total of 100 points, and each of the projects forms just a portion of that, right? So even if I said this already, even if you don't do as successfully as you would have liked to, or as you know that you could on this particular assignment, that doesn't mean that you need to be desperate about the rest of the semester. There's a lot of room for you to make up for that, and there are a lot of points that are still kind of out in the open, up for grabs. So there is even if you don't feel super satisfied with your performance on the first project, I encourage you to sort of remain positive and optimistic, and stay focused and work hard in the rest of the semester. I know that for many of you, it's not that you're not working hard, that it's a little bit different than the on-campus students, that their jobs, their families around you, and everything that really affect your ability to find the time. And so I really applaud you for being able to make it through the program. And I know some of you are even taking more than one class, so I cannot imagine how stressful that is. So hopefully you'll find the extension useful. I think like at this point, it's really just about both on our ends, the TAs are trying to help move some of the students that that have posts on Piazza to help provide some additional advice and to get you moving along, and then to give you just a little bit of chance to for those extra few points that are maybe very, very close to from where you were last night. The other big thing for right now is the fact that the exam is going to open this week. I think that there are probably, I don't have a good sense of how many students, I mean, I guess I could if I just put a poll, but I don't have a good sense of how many students are brand new students in the program. And so just from some of the questions that I received for Proctor Track, it seems that there are quite a number of you that are, for whom this is going to be the first exam that you will take with Proctor Track. So make sure that you give yourself time to actually log in and do the Proctor Track onboarding test ahead of time. This is something that inevitably every semester there's going to be that those few students that are going to leave the onboarding test and discard it as a sort of as a trivial step in the process, and not go through it until they sit down to actually do the exam, and then they discover that they have some issues. And if you sort of do that just as you are about to hit the deadline for the midterm, that doesn't leave a lot of time for you to figure out some other solution, some other alternative, to borrow somebody else's laptop, or to go, there are suggestions of maybe try to see if there is a library, or if there is a computer at your work that's compatible with Proctor Track. I think that as a service, they have been fairly responsive. The program used another service before, which was called ProctorU. I guess I'm referencing it in the introductory lesson for the course. And those of you that have been here long enough, you know that it's a completely different experience what ProctorU had and what Proctor Track provides. And the company that provides the service, they've really been very committed to making sure that the service meets our program's requirements. So they've been fairly responsive in adding new features, for instance, as new courses come online. And so I think that at this point, you'll find it useful for many classes, right? We use it in a simpler form. We just rely for the proctoring from them. We don't use them as the hosting service. So you log into Proctor Track in order to enable the proctoring, and then you log into T-Square. The exam is in T-Square, so you're going to get through go through the exam in T-Square. Actually, rather, the exam will be in T-Square. It's not there yet. So there are certain things that Proctor Track expects. It expects to be able to monitor your system, your screen, your camera. Right, it's supposed to proctor you. So it's supposed to, imagine what would be happening if you were taking the exam in a classroom. So there will be, TA, or likely with a 300-person student exam, there'll be several TAs that will be sort of walking around and keeping an eye on what's going on. So from that perspective, the service is supposed to basically provide us with the same kind of guarantee: A, that it's you who's taking the exam, and B, that you're sort of conforming to the requirements. And the requirements for this exam are: you'll complete it within the specified amount of time, you'll complete it independently, and the exam is closed book, closed notes, closed internet. I said in the note that I put out that you are allowed to use scratch paper, you're allowed to use calculator, physical calculator, and then you're allowed to use the corresponding applications on your computer. So something like Notepad, if that's easier for you to type in the answer and then just copy paste, and copy paste is allowed. So I'll make sure that I'll enable it as a feature in terms of what the system will allow you to do. And then things like your calculator app on your computer. So do not use phones, tablets, smartwatches, like other devices. That's not okay. Paper, you can sort of show the paper front and back when you're about to start the exam, if you're using paper. A lot of you will end up taking the exam at work, in some sort of coffee shop that seems like it's a quiet place. At home, in your office, maybe at home, and then next thing you know, somebody walks in, kid screams in another room or something like that. Don't worry about that. It happens all the time. I mean, what will happen is that Proctor Track will flag that particular time of the exam taking as, something's inappropriate. I mean, we've had cases where sort of the spouse forgot that, that there was an exam session going on in the other room, and so walked in, started talking, and or a child walked in and daddy, or something like that. So all sorts of things. And we've had a sort of any single possible cartoon play in the background also. And so don't worry about those things. Make sure one of the things during the Proctor Track, during the onboarding test, I should mention this explicitly, is sometimes, I'm really not sure how, but sometimes there's some sort of discrepancy between whatever the name on your ID and then the name that you're registered with at Georgia Tech, because Proctor Track will have the class roster with the names exactly as they appear with Georgia Tech. So the most time-consuming fixes that, you know, we cannot do anything about that, and Proctor Track cannot do, and even the administration in the program cannot do anything. You know, it has to somehow involve the registrar's office or something. Are these cases where there is a mismatch of the identity, you know, the identity of the student as shown on the ID and the identity that's with, I don't know whether it's completely with Georgia Tech or just with the particular class, or what exactly happens in those cases. But this is something that will come up during the onboarding test, that you'll figure out that, you know, if there's some sort of mismatch between your IDs, you will not be able to proceed, right? So at least doing the onboarding test as soon as possible will give you a couple of days to sort those things out before you actually take the exam. So that's been one issue. And then also, you know, you'll have to set up the account, and sometimes creating an account, creating a password is not something that, or if you forgot your password, it's not something that instantaneously happens, or instantaneously happens. You're going to have to wait a little bit. Sorry. So those are some things that that you need to keep in mind as you're setting up for the exam. So the other thing, okay, so then once you start taking the exam, you will, what are you going to do? You will, so when you do the proctoring, the onboarding test rather, you're going to resolve these things like, do you have the right password, username and password for logging into Proctor Track? Does your ID match? Does your is your machine configuration compatible with what Proctor Track expects? Like those sorts of things you'll figure out. Now, during the onboarding test, you don't go through the actual experience of then being directed to log into an exam that's hosted in T-Square. So basically, imagine like you've logged in for the collaboration policy quiz, or for the quiz that has the sample questions, that contains the sample questions. So once you log into Proctor Track, then you will log into the quizzes section. You'll go to the quizzes section in T-Square, and that's when you will log into your exam. There is nothing secret about the username and password of the exam. It's just, as I said earlier, they're going to be distributed to you through Proctor Track. So they'll appear in a box which will say CS8803, hashtag, and then a 4-digit number. And so the CS8803 is the username, and the 4-digit number that is going to be the password. And so you log in with those two parameters, with those two values. You'll log in into the exam in T-Square. Once you log in, as far as T-Square is concerned, the exam has started. And this is your one take at taking the exam. And that's why we want to make sure that you don't accidentally kind of start the test before you have set up the proctoring. So that's the idea, that if you're not going to have the username and password until you've started the proctoring, then that will not be possible. Few things to keep in mind during the exam. One thing is make sure that so one thing that's a common mistake, and it's a function of the T-Square interface, is that we've had cases, I think like every semester we have a case where a student opens the test, starts the test, and then clicks submit. so that's really not very useful, because there's nothing in the test at that point. We can see how much time you've spent on the test. We can see those cases. We understand that if you've been logged in for 30 seconds, this is precisely what happened. And so, it's not like you managed to go through all the questions on the exam, write them down, and then pretend that you made an error in submitting and those sorts of things. So just, if something like this happens, just put a post on Piazza, put a private post if you want to, visible to all instructors. Well, not if you want to, but ideally put a private post visible to all instructors. And one of us will, we'll get to it and we'll try to accommodate. So, thing number one is don't click submit until you're actually ready to submit. Number two is, as you're working along, click save. I think that at this point, the configuration in T-Square is such that you cannot go to the next question until you've saved the previous question. So we have every question on a separate page, and you cannot move across pages unless you save. You know, we made a mistake the very first time. We didn't have the questions on separate pages, and then we had few cases where you know, there was some sort of problem or a crash or something like that, and there were a lot of answers that were just completely lost. So now, you know, worst case scenario is the contents of one question can potentially be lost in case there's some sort of problem, and so that's why, you know, just make sure you click save often. The test is so that's question, you know, issue number 2 that, you know, students sometimes forget to you know, to do. So make sure you save, including, you know, when you reach the end, when you reach the final question, save, and then submit. And then the other thing that sometimes happens, that's sort of in the critical portion of the exam, is that there is some sort of problem where there is kind of either a network connectivity issue, or, you know, you lose the connection with ProctorTrack or anything like that. The nice thing is, you know, ProctorTrack will continue proctoring, so, you know, you know, that will sort of work. But, you know, you make sure you reestablish the connection. As soon as the connection gets reestablished, that you know, you notify us, because T-Square will, you know, will submit. So you notify us, and then we'll see what's the appropriate action under those circumstances. We don't have those cases often. We had I think I said this. We had 1 year when ProctorTrack decided to do a migration to a new cloud hosting platform, sort of in the middle of exam period of multiple classes having exams, and then at the final evening when several of the exams had a deadline, and that's when sort of most of the numbers of exam takers were peaking, they had all sorts of scalability problems, and the platform was crashing left and right. And then a lot of students were panicking because they were losing their sessions, and we have not had those kinds of disasters anymore. We had another disaster where it wasn't ProctorTrack, it was T-Square that had a problem in the middle of the exam session. So, you know, technology is great, but technology is technology, right? You know, those of us that understand it a little bit better, we also understand how unreliable it can be. So we've had those issues, but you know, again, not in a while. I think that overall in the program, I'm familiar with a couple of times that T-Square caused problems in some exam, and then you know, a couple of times that it was a ProctorTrack issue. So, you know, given number of semesters, number of courses, number of exam sessions, both between the midterm and the final exam session, that's not that bad. Okay, so what was that? Oh, yes, that does happen. Hoban posted a funny video of what happened during a BBC interview, and yes, that is routinely something that happens during our exams. You know, if we had time to sort of assemble a funny video, that would be definitely, you know, maybe even funnier than the one that Hoban posted, but that was pretty funny with the mom pulling the child sort of in out of the room. Okay, so once you're in the exam, what should you expect? You should expect at this point about 10 questions. So actually 10 questions, not about 10 questions, well, about 10 questions. Let me not say this precisely. So typically what I do, because I try not to have the exam finalized when I have the last office hours before the exam, because when I do have the exam finalized, then during the office hours, I end up telling students way more than I should about the kinds of questions that they can expect. So you should expect about 10 questions. So, you know, there'll be about, you know, either will be each question 10 points worth, or you'll have, you know, couple of questions that will be 5, and a couple of questions that will be 15 points worth, and then the rest of them 10. So take a look at the value of the questions. If it's a 5-point question, if you expect that it will be something easier. The nice thing about these, you guys not having sort of an exam book with a bunch of blank space that you can write on, sometimes helps in these situations. With the on-campus exams, when I hand out an exam book with a bunch of pages and a question on each page, I tend to see sort of get a 2-page answer for a 5-point question, and that wasn't the idea. It's supposed to be a more brief answer. So about 10 questions. For the most part, there'll be 10 points each. Maybe a couple of questions that are 5, a couple of questions that are 15. The format of the questions will be similar to what you saw in the sample exam questions. So there'll be few things. You will have questions that are multiple choice, multiple answer. There will be questions that are fill in the blanks. And there will be potentially, one question, 1 or 2 questions where you need to provide something that's a really short answer. Realistically, not more than 1. I think when I started, when the first time I gave the first time we had this class, I think I had 3 questions where I really needed to read the answer. And it takes long with this many. So I grade the exams. So the TAs are busy trying to make sure that they're supporting you with the projects and that they're grading the projects, and then I grade the exams. And so I realized sort of that I have to make the process as scalable as possible. So even with multiple choice, so they're basically, for the most part, the questions will be multiple choice, fill in the blanks, multiple choice, multiple selection, fill in the blanks type of question. Maybe there'll be, a question that will require you to provide a short answer. Make sure that depending on, if your screen and everything, make sure you sort of look through all the options in the test, so that you're not sort of missing some options, and particularly in a multiple choice, multiple selection question, that will be a problem. I try to basically about at least 90% of the points you basically are earned at just a couple of point granularity. So 1, 2, or 3 points increments, and maybe there are 1 or 2 things that are worth 5 points each. So basically, even if a question is worth 10 points, it doesn't mean it's an all or nothing thing. It typically, the way the points are calculated, it's at a smaller granularity. So for instance, maybe if it's a question that you're given 4 choices, and the question is to, it's asking you which one of these is correct, and 2 are correct and 2 are not correct. So you earn points both for correctly selecting the correct answers, and also you earn points for not selecting the incorrect answers. So it's, I'm not giving negative points per se, but in order to earn full credit of a question, you must, on the multiple choice, multiple selection questions, in order to earn full credit, you must correctly identify the correct answers and then correctly not select the incorrect answers. So keep that in mind. I don't know whether students think that indeed sort of thought that was correct, but I've had cases where students sort of marked every possible choice, and I don't know whether that was in hopes that, well, it's got to be one of these. So because funny enough, the default configuration of T-square will take that as a correct answer. So by default, if you just on a multiple choice, multiple selection, if you mark all of them and the one that's correct is among the ones you've marked, or the ones you then they'll T-square will give you the credit, but I won't. So make sure you keep that in mind. For the questions that are multiple, that are fill in the blanks, try to follow the suggested syntax. If I've asked you to write to fill in A or B, and then maybe sort of A is memory and B is CPU. And so if I ask you in the question, fill in A or B in the blank lines, and instead of filling A or B, you end up filling memory and CPU. I mean, ultimately, I will obviously see that that's what you did, and you're not going to lose points because of that. You're just going to make my life a little bit more difficult. So that's why I'm asking you to please pay attention to what I've asked you to, what are the terms that I'm asking you to fill in, just so that I, there's less for me to manually go step by step. When you submit the exam in T-Square, there is an option where you can review your submission. So there's an option for feedback. So on the quizzes that you submitted, you'll be able to see that option. So if you go on feedback, and you'll be able to see things. So once you submit the test, you will not be able to see any feedback. So the exam is going to be configured as with no feedback until I ultimately pass the grades back to you. Now, once I pass the grades back to you, that's when I will enable feedback, and you will be able to see your answers. And so, if you notice cases like that you've sort of incorrectly, maybe you feel like, well, I didn't really type what she was asking me to type, and so maybe that's what I lost points on. You can come back and check with me, and so if that's a problem, I'll give you the points. I get all the answers from all the tests in a humongous spreadsheet that I then further manipulate and massage, and ultimately get as many of the points computed automatically, but then I actually go column by column and look for these cases, both where Excel's complaining for no value or something like that, or where I sort of notice that, oh, well, you gave me answer 5 milliseconds and I was looking for just 5, and because you wrote MS, it's complaining, or things like that. Try to do those things. Use a calculator if you can. And with some of the calculation types of problems, I'm a little bit generous that the math, you may not have it like 100%. Some of these are that you maybe have rounded some numbers, or maybe and so I try to kind of not look for a exact number, but sort of look for numbers in some small range around the correct answer to just catch those rounding errors, etc. And then I have had students that just sort of wrote the formula, and hopefully I'm not going to have too many of those. I will not take points off for that, but I'm asking you to please, as much as you can, actually do the math as opposed to just give me the formula. In terms of what can you expect, now that I'm mentioning formulas, right, and they start sounding like real school, in terms of things that you can expect. So the reason the exam is closed books, closed notes, closed internet is not because we're out to get you, to trick you, but because honestly, the kinds of questions that we ask are such that if you do understand the material, you should be able to answer. So with respect to, when we talk about problems and formulas, it's not that you need to memorize some formulas. If you sort of understand, okay, well, if I need to kind of think about what's going to be the throughput of the system, or the wait times of the system, or the average completion time of the system under one threading model versus another threading model, you should be able to kind of think through the scenarios and compute what is the expected time to maybe process a sequence of orders, right? So you had this kind of question. We'll work through these kinds of examples in some of the lessons when we talked about the different threading models, and then there was a question like this in the sample quiz. So it's not that you need to sort of memorize a formula, but you need to be able to understand it. To understand the material. It's not like you have to sort of memorize all possible definitions, but if you understand the concepts, if you understand what is the purpose of a concept, how they were developed, why they were developed, what was the motivation behind them, then you should be able to do well. in terms of the papers that are part of this part of the lectures, so you have, there are several papers that are represented in the lessons that are covered in some level of detail in the lessons that we covered. So there is, we talked about the Birel intro to threading. We talked about the Solaris paper, the user level and kernel level papers, and we talked about the Flash web server paper. So you know, there in every one of these papers, there's more detail than what we cover in the lesson. So I'm not going to ask questions from, you know, parts of the paper that about things that maybe I have not mentioned at all in the lessons, right? So if there is something that you feel like, well, you know, she never talked about this in the lesson at all, then that's not going to be the exam. I personally would find it sort of hard to read a paper if I have to go back and forth the lesson. Okay, did you talk about this sentence or did you talk about this subsection? Just read the paper. You know? And then I would personally find it easier to look at the lesson first and then read the paper. I think that will both help me a little bit better to just keep track of which portions of the paper I should focus on, because at that point you'd know what was really covered in the lesson. And then some of you may not have had a lot of experience with reading research papers, and some of them are structured maybe a little bit differently, or you know, they're a little bit different type of read compared to maybe textbook or technical reports or sort of industry reports or those sorts of things. So just from that perspective, I think it will be easier. But again, it's completely a personal choice and personal preference, what makes more sense for you. If you see a question and you sort of your gut instinct is telling you, oh, she said that she's not gonna ask you to memorize things, and this would mean, you know, for me to answer this question, I must have like memorized something. That's probably not true. So, you know, just pause and think a little bit, and you know, there probably is going to be enough information in that question that you can really put the answer, the answer yourself. So, you know, if you feel like, oh, I don't remember this, you know, I didn't memorize this part really well to answer this question, try to logically think through how should the system be built? What are maybe these parameters that, you know, she's trying to specify? What are they supposed to tell me or tell us about what's the purpose of maybe some system feature, or how the system will behave or something like that. So, I feel that if you do that, then you'll be fine. The exam is 80 minutes. My guess is, if you have situations like this where you're sort of really don't feel like you really know the answer, but you have to think through the whole process, it's probably not going to be on every question. Maybe there'll be a few questions where you'll feel like that. So for the most part, it will take you substantially less than 80 minutes to complete the test, and so that gives you enough of leg room to go through some portion of the questions relatively quickly, and to leave yourself a little more thinking time for some of the other questions. I'm not going to ask coding questions. So there are not going to be any questions that, coding questions. I'm not going to ask questions that require you to write code. I am going to ask questions where I maybe show a snippet of code and ask ask for you to maybe explain what that does, or explain if there are any problems with it, or something like that. So just so you know. So here's one, I guess, from a late joiner. Will there be negative markings in the multiple choice? So this is a minute, I guess, like after I started, about 35. They're not going to be, again, let me reiterate, they're not going to be quite negative markings in the sense, I'm not going to take points off because I don't like the negative connotation of that, but effectively, yes, because you will, in order to reach full credit, each selection carries some points. So you either get points for correctly selecting the correct answers, or you get points for correctly not selecting the answers that are not correct. Whether they're going to be equally distributed, so maybe like 4 choices, each 2.5. So there are 2.5 points if you select the correct answer, 2.5 points if you don't select the incorrect answer, or whether there's sort of 3 + 2, where I give a little more weight for you to for cases where you make correctly the selection, and then less points where you you earn less points for not selecting a portion of the test, or not selecting a question that was not correct, or something like that. So you're not going to earn negative points, right? Because like if there is a negative point situation, then you actually may earn negative points. That's not going to be the case, but in order to earn full credit, you must sort of do both. Make a correct selection and do not select the incorrect ones. And I want to highlight this because I'm not sure why we've had cases. Oh, okay, sorry, because mine just said just now. I don't know whether students indeed felt that all of the possible choices was correct, or they felt that they'll sort of game the system like that. But I definitely see every now and then situations where students just mark everything, and that's only partially helpful in this particular case, right? So what else do I want to say about the exam? Things that there in the lessons, there's some information that there are certain portions where we spent more time, and so there are explanations coming from multiple directions, where maybe there is some sort of analogy, maybe there is some sort of additional quiz or something like that. And I don't think, certainly hope I don't I try not to go and try to find like the sneakiest thing embedded in one slide where I spend 22 seconds talking about something, or 12 seconds talking about something. Ooh, that's a good one. Let me ask a question about that. I mean, I don't, if I didn't find something worthy of me spending some time to tell you what that is, or that probably is not worthy for me to really use that in assessing your knowledge of the test. Maybe every now and then it happens, just because it's sort of, maybe sometimes we ended up maybe talking more in office hours or in Piazza a lot about something, and I sort of, there was a disconnect between how well it was represented in the exam, but maybe it has happened. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I try not to ask questions like that. So hopefully that gives you some direction as you're studying. I put the study guidelines online, and so these questions should guide you in what are really the things that you are expected to understand in order to do well in this class and do well on the exam. So that's the point of those questions. If you haven't looked at them and you're just looking at them now, let me just remind you, these questions are more about kind of describing what's the material that you're expected to know. They're not representative of the kinds of questions that you will have on the exam, because they're totally non-T-square spreadsheet grading friendly. Okay, so you're not going to have the questions in that format. The format of the questions is going to resemble more the format of the questions in T-square. Okay, so let's see, what else do I want to say about the exam? Okay, so there is another question about, if I show you code, code snippet, and I ask you, whether it's okay or not okay. And I'll really clarify this, but no, my intention is not to grade you on the correctness of C syntax or the correctness of, maybe some system call or something like that. It will be more and the evaluation will more be about, what do we spend time on? We spend time on talking about threads and concurrency. So the focus of the evaluation will be on that. Now, granted, I understand that if I give you text code that has incorrect syntax, that may sort of push you in marking things as incorrect based on syntax only, but that's not what I'm going to be looking for. So don't basically, if for you to know something, to know a precise answer of a question, all it takes is for you to look up the man pages, kind of means that I'm not going to ask that question. Precise syntax is not what I'm looking for in terms of correctness, but pseudocode, basic structure of critical sections. How do you ensure things like mutual exclusion? How do you ensure things like, how do you implement things like priority? How do you deal with sort of signaling, like these kinds of things? Make sure that you know that. And these are things that unavoidably, in order for you to get to where you are with Project One, you've spent quite a bit of time working on. And then for questions, there'll be like one question like this. It's not going to be that half of the exam will be here's code, tell me what's wrong with it. Here's code, tell me what it does. There'll be one or two types of questions, or one question like this at most. Hold on, there's one more question that came up. So mostly pseudocode. So this was maybe, what was it? Maybe like 43-ish minutes or something like that. And then you are welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad that that the study guide helped. Actually, we really started using something like that or sharing something like that with the students just in the last couple of semesters. I didn't think of it, and I think that I can recognize how it can be helpful for the students. So I'm glad that you're finding it useful. Okay, and so I think that that's probably all about the exam. Okay, and then when is Project 3 going to be available? Okay, so as we are going through, so most of you are wrapping up Project 1 and moving into the midterm exam. Tony answered after the midterm, so I'm going to the TAs are more familiar if there are kind of any issues right now with the back end, but my goal is to release it by next Monday, so that next Monday in office hours, Hoban, and he's online, so he'll find out now. Hoban, you're gonna do office hours next week because I'm traveling, I'm going out of town, so that Hoban can give you a little bit of prep work for Project 3. Typically we, it's useful for you guys to have access at least around that time to the project. So not necessarily waiting for everybody to be done with the midterm before we release Project 3. You will, in a way, have to have a chance to start early. You'll have plenty of time to work on Project 3. So, by the time it's due, it's essentially a month from now. So you'll have plenty of time to work on it. Project 3 will be sort of substantial in terms of probably in terms of thinking, and it will be it's really substantial in terms of grading, because it tends to have a little bit more open-ended portions that are more about design and less about you precisely filling in some portions of the template, the skeleton code that we share with you. So you have a little bit more flexibility in design. I think you'll find it more intellectually challenging, regardless of how experienced with C you are. So it's more about coming up with a good design and then executing on it, as opposed to just being able to program well. So I think that the thinking part there is it's not that the code. I think that from a coding perspective, it's less than project one. From a thinking perspective, it's more than project one. So let me put it like that. And then hopefully by then, because you've had chance to, at this point you've spent over a month working on this first assignment that's all C-based. That by the time you go into project 3, you will feel more comfortable, and it will be a more even playing field for everyone in terms of where your C skills are. So after the midterm, so I'll grade the exams and I will distribute the grades. You will have the grades before the drop date. And I know I set things up so that there's plenty of time for that to happen, but now I don't remember when the exact drop date is, so I don't want to give you a wrong date. Let me just double check. This class. Okay, so drop date is October 26th. So yes, you'll have plenty of time for you guys to get the grades back before drop date. You'll get the grades by the time before drop date. You'll have the grades from project 1, and you'll have the grades from the midterm. The other thing that you will that will happen before drop date is by then you will be also you'll definitely will have a chance to go through the first part of project 3. So the way project 3 is structured, it has 2 parts, and kind of like in this assignment. So actually, I should not compare it. So it has 2 parts. The first part is we think a little bit more straightforward from an implementation perspective, and it's a little bit more about you knowing C than you knowing the material that's required for you to design and implement the second part. So that gives us 2 things. The first thing is for you guys that maybe still don't feel like you really own this programming environment. It gives you a chance to do a little bit of further self-evaluation. I mean, if you're still struggling with that portion of the assignment, and if you did poorly on project 1 and are not really happy with your midterm, that's an indication that maybe you need to figure out how to give yourself a little more time and maybe come back to the class. But if you sort of have, if you're comfortable at least with that part, even if you end up and if not completing all different pieces of the project or all different points from the midterms and everything, this still gives you some context for you to earn some substantial amount of points, even if you miss on the complete assignment. So one purpose of that part 1 of the assignment is to give you a way to a little bit further self-evaluate where you are in terms of programming skills, so that you can assess how well you can do in the rest of the semester. I would say that the last project is going to be of a similar complexity as part 1 of this next assignment, so you'll be able to figure out what to do there, and then it's also going to give you a way to earn points, even if you end up earn more points, even if you end up messing up in a more significant way in that second much more interesting, but also in a way more challenging part of the assignment. I'm not saying it's more difficult. I think that the difficulty in project one is significant for students that, that have never worked with parallel programs, that, have had only some passing familiarity with C. I'm not going to argue, that the difficulty is all there in project one. The difficulty in project three is more of, I think that it's more of the intellectual kind of, just getting the design ready. There's still implementation challenges, but I think they're sort of overall they're it's more the thinking part that that's required. So that was that question. Keep my session active. Okay, so we'll confirm on project 3, but next office hours, will be we'll talk more about project 3. Or hoping we'll talk more about next office hours. No, so there's last question, whether we've given up on C. No, we're not going to give up on C. So yeah, project 4 will be in C also. I'm not sure where the rumors are coming from here. Yes, exactly. It's hearsay. So it's no, we're doing all projects in C. So short answer. And we really, I think we said at the beginning of the semester, it just is a programming language. It gives you the right environment in order for you to deal with many of these issues that many of you are running into, kind of memory corruption, leaks, pointer arithmetic, concurrency, etc. So there's so many issues that you run into that if you were working in another language, that just it would be impossible to see all these problems. So you're not building an operating system, or it's not sort of a hacking class where you're going in and changing the OS scheduler or building device drivers, but by the kinds of projects that you have to do, and yes, and it really exposes you to the low levels. Now, as Tony says, that's not to say that there aren't legitimate OS projects and entire OSs which are written in other languages. So Go is really popular across Google. Rust is one of my students that he graduated last month, so everything that he did was in Rust. So none of the other students can work with his code because they're running into all sorts of issues, but he was sort of a purist when it comes to that question. I think OCaml has a lot of nice features in terms of especially for certain types of tasks. So, but from the class perspective, we're sticking with C. Tony, from a PhD perspective, it's a little bit more open question in terms of what's the environment that you want to pursue your coding. All right, 1 time, 2nd time, 3rd time. No more questions, no more comments. So I will see you guys, I guess, in a couple of weeks. So next week, Hoban, and then the following Monday is fall break. And although we're not going to have office hours on fall break per se that Monday, but we'll squeeze in something on a Wednesday or something like that, like we did a couple of weeks ago. Okay. And there's this last comment about thank you for saying this, Vikrant. We actually get comments like this quite a bit. We get a lot of students that really haven't had a lot of experience with C, and they did they ended up learning a lot and applying it at work. I just earlier today I was exchanging emails with a student who is in Atlanta for the career fair. There's a career fair on campus today. I think there is a separate one, separate format that they're also trying to accommodate a lot of the online students. But I know many online students do come to Atlanta also for during the career fair. So I was exchanging emails with one student who is here for doing recruiting for Cisco, but he was also talking about how much he's directly taken things or skills that he picked up from this class and applied them at work, and that company he worked for ended up being bought by Cisco, and so now he's actually looking for ways to, other formats to get engaged in research. So, okay. All right, guys, so good luck on the exam. So the exam, just one more thing about the exam. You will be able to see the exam once it opens, but once it opens on the 29th at 3 p.m. And then officially, I'm going to have the exam open until midnight on October 3rd. So for a while, all you will be able to see will be that the exam is due on October 3rd at midnight, although I'm telling you it's anywhere on Earth. But I'm going to make that adjustment for the actual time zone and everything only once it gets close to the actual deadline, because I don't want you to somehow be misled by, oh, but we noticed that the date said October 4th and didn't pay attention to the time and thought it's actually on the 4th at midnight. So I'm going to keep it October 3rd midnight as in Easter time, but because that's the only way I can configure T-Square, unfortunately. And that's the time that you will see, but don't panic, and I'll communicate this via Piazza so everybody knows that. So don't panic. It is until October 3rd anywhere on Earth, so you do have technically until the morning, Atlanta time, morning on the 4th. But just so you know why you're seeing that. So, okay, enjoy prepping for the exam and good luck on the midterm. Bye-bye.